Originally answered, in 1940, Great Britain brought on mainland Europe only 10 divisions to fight the Germans. Is this a case of serious betrayal? Serious betrayal? Do you have any idea how much those 10 infantry, if I might add, divisions and the rest of the forces sent to French meant to the British Armed Forces at that time? That's around half of all the British Army personnel. At the outbreak of World War II in September 1939, the regular army number was around 220,000 men, supported by 170,000 reserves in a total of 390,000 men. The army was later expanded by the means of conscription after the war started, and the army size increased to roughly double its pre-war size by the time the Battle of France started, so it's roughly 780,000. One British division equals 18,000 men give or take, so 10 divisions means it's around 180,000 men at the start of the Battle of France, and at the peak was 13 divisions, so the highest amount of British Expeditionary Forces, BEF, at France was 234,000 soldiers. This doesn't count other troops, such as the General Headquarters troops. That doesn't count in the 10 divisions and armor formations, which in total added the total number of British Army at France by the time the Germans struck at around 380,000 troops, 50% of all British Army personnel at that time. The French and German Army both maintained conscription for their army way before the war started, unlike the British that preferred an all-volunteer force. The French never abolished conscription after World War I, and the Germans reintroduced it after Hitler came to power, and so, as a result, both powers could field 3 million soldiers by the time of war. Keep in mind that the British had to hold other strategic locations critical for its war effort. Several divisions had to be kept at Egypt and British Palestine to secure the Suez Canal, and other divisions were placed at other colonies, such as British India and Malaya, provided critical resources to the British Army, and the population too in general. This made the British rely on its territorial army, reservists that have jobs critical to the British war effort, such as factory workers, for the bulk of its home island defense personnel at the Battle of France. The British, like the rest of the Allies, gave all it had to fight the German army, so saying that they committed a betrayal simply by looking at statistics on paper is an insult to the sacrifice the UK gave to fight against the Axis forces. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the channel, where we shine a light on the forgotten corners and the fiercely debated questions of history. We delve into the past not just to recount events, but to truly understand their echoes in the present. And today we're tackling a question that for some has lingered like a persistent shadow over the heroic narrative of World War II. Did Great Britain betray Europe in 1940, bringing only a mere 10 divisions to fight the Germans on the mainland? 10 divisions. On paper, it sounds almost negligible when set against the colossal might of the German war machine. It's a statistic that, at first glance, might provoke a gasp, a furrowed brow, and perhaps even a sense of injustice. A serious betrayal? A heavy price paid by the world, all because Britain supposedly held back? Well, my dear viewers, prepare yourselves. Because today we are going to challenge that assumption, dissect that statistic, and peel back the layers of history to reveal a truth far more complex, far more dramatic, and ultimately, far more awe-inspiring than mere numbers can convey. This isn't just about troop counts. It's about the heart of a nation, the impossible choices made in the darkest hour, and a fight for survival that redefined courage. Stay with me, because what you think you know about 1940 and Britain's role in it is about to be turned on its head. This is a story of sacrifice, not betrayal. A story that, I believe, will leave you not with questions, but with a profound sense of admiration. To truly understand the decisions made in 1940, we must first transport ourselves back to September 1939, to the very moment war was declared. Forget the image of a vast, industrialized military power ready to unleash millions of troops. The reality of the British Army at the outbreak of World War II was starkly different. Unlike its continental counterparts, Britain had, for decades, favored a smaller, professional, volunteer force designed primarily for colonial policing and imperial defense. Conscription, the compulsory enrollment of citizens into military service, had been largely abolished after the immense sacrifices of World War I. At that critical juncture, the regular British Army numbered a mere 220,000 men. To augment this, there were approximately 170,000 reserves. In total, a fighting force of roughly 390,000 men. Now, think about that for a moment. This wasn't an army designed for a massive continental land war against a resurgent, militarized Germany. This was an army stretched thin across a global empire, maintaining peace in distant lands and protecting vital trade routes. It was a quality force, yes, well-trained and professional, but quantity was simply not on its side. Compare this to the millions of soldiers that France and Germany could instantly mobilize, thanks to their long-standing policies of conscription. The sheer disparity in manpower was staggering. Britain entered the war with a commitment to build a mass army, but that takes time. Time, as we know, was a luxury that would quickly run out. So when we talk about 10 divisions, or even the eventual 13 divisions of the British Expeditionary Force, we're not talking about a paltry contribution from an overflowing military chest. We're talking about a monumental commitment, a stripping bare of resources, a gamble of truly epic proportions. It was in fact a decision that would leave the homeland dangerously exposed, a risk no other nation faced in quite the same way. But why, you might ask, was this small force so disproportionately important? The answer lies in the very nature of British military organization and the unspoken sacrifices it represented. Let's delve deeper into what those mere 10 divisions actually represented. By the time the German blitzkrieg crashed through the Low Countries and into France in May 1940, the British Army had indeed undergone a rapid, almost miraculous expansion due to the reintroduction of conscription. The total force had roughly doubled, reaching approximately 780,000 men. A significant achievement in just a few short months, but still dwarfed by the millions of Axis and Allied forces. Now, let's put those divisions into context. A single British infantry division in 1940 comprised, on average, around 18,000 highly trained men. So, 10 divisions equate to approximately 180,000 soldiers. At its peak, the British Expeditionary Force, or BEF, actually fielded 13 divisions, meaning roughly 234,000 fighting men. And here's where it gets truly critical. This figure doesn't even include the vital, non-divisional troops, such as specialized general headquarters units, crucial logistical support, and importantly, the nascent armored formations that were also deployed to France. When you factor in these additional forces, the total number of British Army personnel committed to the fight on the continent against the Germans reached a staggering 380,000 troops. Think about that for a moment. 380,000 men. That was almost precisely 50% of the entire British Army personnel at that time. Half of all Britain's trained, equipped, and deployable soldiers were sent across the Channel to stand shoulder to shoulder with their French allies. This was not a token gesture. This was not holding back. This was an all-in commitment, a laying bare of Britain's military strength at the very moment its homeland faced an existential threat. It was a decision that left the British Isles astonishingly vulnerable, relying heavily on a rapidly assembled and less trained territorial army for home defense. To call this a betrayal is to fundamentally misunderstand the scale of this commitment. It was, in fact, an act of immense courage and profound national sacrifice. And it would soon lead to a moment of unimaginable peril, a defining moment that would test the very soul of the British nation. To fully grasp the magnitude of Britain's contribution, we must also consider the fundamental differences in military policy between the major European powers leading up to the war. This wasn't just about a different philosophy, it was about a deeply ingrained historical and cultural approach to military readiness. France, scarred by the devastating losses of World War I, never truly abandoned conscription. Their national defense strategy was predicated on maintaining a large, standing army capable of rapid mobilization. Generations of Frenchmen understood that military service was an expected part of their civic duty. Similarly, in Germany, after Hitler's rise to power, conscription was swiftly reintroduced, becoming a cornerstone of his aggressive rearmament program. The German industrial and social machinery was geared towards creating a vast, well-trained, and highly disciplined military force. As a direct consequence of these long-term policies, both France and Germany could, at the outbreak of the war, field armies numbering in the millions, estimated at around 3 million soldiers each. Britain, however, stood apart. Proud of its naval tradition and its global empire, the nation had a historical preference for a professional, all-volunteer army. The memory of the horrific casualties of the Somme and Passchendaele fueled a strong public sentiment against compulsory military service, at least in peacetime. This meant that when the storm clouds of war gathered, Britain had to embark on a rapid, almost frantic, expansion of its army from a relatively small professional corps. It was a monumental undertaking, akin to building a modern skyscraper in a matter of months. While admirable, it inherently meant that Britain simply could not, at that precise moment, match the sheer numerical might of the continental powers. So, when critics point to the only 10 divisions, they are often overlooking this crucial context. It wasn't a choice to send fewer troops out of unwillingness or stinginess. It was a reflection of the national defense policy of decades and the sheer impossibility of conjuring millions of trained soldiers overnight. The British commitment was not just about the numbers they did send, but the profound effort required to send them, and the strategic vulnerability it created back home. But the challenges didn't end there. Britain had a global empire to consider, vital lifelines to protect, and a homeland to defend. The decision to send half its army to France was not made lightly. It was made with an understanding of the immense, almost unbearable, risks involved. And those risks would soon be put to the ultimate test in the desperate days of May and June 1940. When we discuss Britain's military deployment in 1940, it's absolutely vital to remember that unlike France or Germany, Britain was the heart of a vast global empire. This wasn't just a matter of prestige. It was a strategic imperative, a network of interconnected territories and trade routes that were the very lifeblood of the nation's war effort. Ignoring this global burden is to ignore a massive piece of the strategic puzzle. Several British divisions, crucial and highly trained, had to be deployed in far-flung corners of the world to secure these vital strategic locations. Consider Egypt and British Palestine, for example. Divisions were stationed there, not just to maintain order, but to protect the Suez Canal, the invaluable waterway that connected Britain to its empire in Asia, a critical artery for oil, resources, and troop movements. Losing the Suez Canal would have been an unmitigated disaster, severely hampering Britain's ability to wage war and sustain its global operations. Further east, in British India and Malaya, Other divisions were tasked with safeguarding colonies that provided critical raw materials, rubber, tin, spices, essential resources for Britain's industrial war machine. These weren't just exotic locales. They were crucial cogs in the global economic engine that powered the Allied effort. Moreover, these colonies themselves represented vast populations, many of whom would later contribute immensely to the Allied cause. To abandon these territories or leave them vulnerable would have been an act of catastrophic self-sabotage. This global responsibility meant that Britain simply did not have the luxury of concentrating all its military might on a single front. While half its army fought in France, the other half was stretched across the globe, defending the very lifelines that allowed Britain to continue fighting. This made the defense of the home island itself incredibly precarious. With so many regular troops committed abroad or on the continent, Britain had to rely heavily on its territorial army, a force of reservists, many of whom held jobs critical to the British war effort, such as factory workers and skilled laborers. These were citizen soldiers, rapidly mobilized and less thoroughly trained than the regular army. Yet they formed the last line of defense against a potential German invasion. The image of these men, often armed with outdated equipment, standing ready to defend their shores against the might of the Wehrmacht, is a testament to national courage, not betrayal. It's a powerful illustration of a nation facing an impossible juggling act, making heart-wrenching choices, and sacrificing safety at home to fight the greater evil abroad. And as the storm clouds gathered over Dunkirk, the true cost of these decisions would become terrifyingly clear. The conversation around Britain's land forces in 1940 often overlooks two absolutely critical elements: the vulnerability of the home front and the immense, indispensable power of the Royal Navy. To claim betrayal based solely on army division numbers is to ignore the strategic realities that shaped Britain's entire war effort. With half its regular army committed to France and other divisions scattered across the empire, Britain was left shockingly exposed to a potential German invasion. The formidable German war machine, having swept through France, would soon be just 20 miles across the English Channel. The threat was not theoretical, it was terrifyingly real. The defense of the British Isles, therefore, relied heavily on its hastily expanded, less experienced territorial army, and crucially, on the unwavering might of the Royal Navy. The Royal Navy was not just a collection of ships, it was the ultimate guardian of British sovereignty, the bulwark against invasion, and the lifeline for global trade and resource imports. This was a navy that, while facing the threats of German U-boats and surface raiders, was also tasked with defending the Atlantic convoy routes, protecting the Empire's sea lanes, and ensuring that vital supplies, food, fuel, raw materials, could reach the besieged island. Without the Royal Navy, Britain would have starved, its war industries would have ground to a halt, and its capacity to fight would have evaporated. The men and resources poured into maintaining this dominant naval force were astronomical, a commitment that directly impacted the size and rapid expansion of its land army. Furthermore, let's not forget the nascent, but rapidly expanding, Royal Air Force. The Battle of Britain, which would soon rage in the skies over England, demonstrated the critical need for air superiority. Building, training, and equipping an air force capable of repelling the Luftwaffe required immense industrial capacity, manpower, and strategic foresight. These resources, these men, these sacrifices were all part of Britain's war effort, inextricably linked to its ability to fight on the continent, yet they don't appear in the simple count of divisions in France. To dismiss Britain's overall contribution by cherry-picking one statistic is to misunderstand the very essence of total war and the interconnected nature of military power. The British, far from betraying their allies, were fighting for their very survival while simultaneously throwing everything they had, everything, into the continental crucible. And that commitment would soon lead to one of the most miraculous and desperate moments in military history.